October 17, 2025, at 5:12 a.m., the Caribbean was unusually calm, the kind of stillness that comes before something terrible is about to happen. Around 90 miles north of Venezuela's coast, a low-profile vessel crept through open waters, its fiberglass hull barely visible above the surface. It wasn't a fishing boat. It was what U.S. intelligence calls a narco-sub, a handmade craft built for one purpose: to disappear. Moments later, a U.S. Navy drone locked onto the target. What followed was a flash across the horizon, then smoke expanding over the sea. Within minutes, the vessel was gone from radar. The Pentagon later announced that a U.S. operation had neutralized a drug-carrying submarine linked to Venezuela's trafficking network, reportedly carrying synthetic opioids and cocaine, bound for the U.S. coastline. But unlike previous encounters, this one left survivors. 2 men were rescued by a Navy helicopter and brought aboard a U.S. warship for questioning. President Donald Trump hailed the mission as a strike against narco-terrorists, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the Caribbean is no longer a safe passage for criminal fleets. Yet in Caracas, outrage built fast. Venezuela's government condemned the action as a pirate-style attack, and Trinidad officials began probing claims that 2 of their citizens were taken out at sea. By sunrise, oil slicks stained the water, and videos from passing cargo ships began circulating online. Beneath the political noise and official briefings, one question was left: was this about stopping drugs, or about drawing new lines of power in the Caribbean? Let me take you through what happened next. At 4:17 a.m., the Caribbean sky looked deceptively calm. The sea stretched out in a sheet of quiet silver, broken only by the faint hum of engines somewhere deep beneath the surface. In that stillness, a small fiberglass submarine was crawling north, 40 feet long and painted dull blue to disappear into the sea. Inside it were 4 men. All 4 of them were smugglers, working for one of Venezuela's most dangerous cartels, ferrying a shipment of synthetic opioids bound for the Gulf. They had been moving for 3 nights, surfacing only to charge batteries and take their bearings by the faint horizon light. They thought they were invisible, but the satellites had already found them. 200 miles away, on the deck of the USS Macon, a destroyer stationed east of Aruba, radar operators were watching the faint pulse of the narco-sub on their screens. The signal was intermittent, bouncing in and out of thermal range, like a ghost in the water. At 4:19, the watch officer leaned over his console and called out quietly, "Contact confirmed. Grid 49 Charlie. Movement consistent with semi-submersible." The order came down minutes later. Intercept. Apprehend if possible. Over the Caribbean, 2 F-18 Hornets held position, their engines throttled low to stay below radar thresholds. The sky was still dark, the horizon just beginning to fade from black to deep indigo. Their orders were clear: force the vessel below to surface, disable movement, and secure survivors if possible. From the USS Macon, a Seahawk helicopter lifted off the deck, its rotors slicing humid air as it headed east. Searchlights stayed off to maintain stealth. Inside, the crew moved with utmost accuracy, keeping their scanners calibrated, ropes ready to drop, and all rescue gear ready to be used. Far beneath them, the sea has shifted. Inside the submersible, the crew suddenly felt a strange tremor ripple through the walls. It was a low, rhythmic vibration that didn't belong to the sea. It wasn't the sound of waves or their own engine. It was deeper, mechanical, and man-made. The captain froze. He had spent years smuggling along these waters and knew the ocean's language. This wasn't it. These were jet engines, patrol aircraft. Someone was above them. He quickly motioned for the mechanic to cut the power. The sub's small engine wound down, and the vessel slipped into total silence, drifting in the dark currents. Now, only the faint creaks of metal under pressure and the sound of backup power filled the cabin. The men exchanged a few panicked glances. Every sound suddenly felt louder, every movement dangerous. They were hiding in plain sight, and they knew the hunters were close. By 4:35 a.m., The U.S. carrier group had eyes on its target. Through infrared scans, they could see 4 human heat signatures packed inside a 40-foot-long fiberglass vessel, the kind used by smugglers to move quietly beneath radar. A coded message flashed through the radio network. Authorization granted. But the mission wasn't to sink the craft outright. This was a precision strike, designed to stop the sub without killing those inside. A moment later, the ocean shook. A targeted charge hit the water close to the vessel's stern, and the pressure from the blast hit like a giant's punch. Metal rattled, the propeller shaft twisted, and the hull pressed under the force. Inside, the crew panicked as alarms screamed and warning lights flared red. Cold seawater began seeping through a fracture near the rear compartment. The captain barked for the ballast to be released. Within seconds, compressed air whooshed through the vents, forcing the semi-submersible upward. It surfaced unevenly, tilting to one side, smoke and steam rising from its damaged engine. Around it, the Caribbean waters hissed and foamed, glowing faintly under the helicopter's searchlight that now circled overhead. Above, the Seahawk's silhouette appeared through the clouds. The helicopter dropped in altitude, hovering just above the waves. A fast rope team of 4 Navy SEALs deployed into the water, their movements synchronized against the spray. Within seconds, they were alongside the crippled vessel. Half submerged and burning from the rear, the sub offered little resistance. 2 crew members lay motionless inside, slumped near the bulkhead. The others, drenched and trembling, had already surfaced, clinging to the slick fiberglass hull. The SEALs moved fast, hand signals, flash sweeps, checks for weapons. Within moments, the men were restrained, secured to flotation gear, and pulled clear of the sinking sub. From above, the scene looked almost unreal. A black speck drifting in a sheet of silver, caught between moonlight and rotor wash. The Seahawk helicopter hovered steadily, its blades carving rings into the sea. Below, the damaged sub began to tilt nose down, water gushing through the fractured hull as its rear hatch slipped beneath the surface. One of the SEALs took a quick GPS reading, marking the spot for later recovery, though everyone knew the craft would be gone long before a retrieval ship arrived. Within minutes, the 2 surviving men were brought into the Seahawk's cargo bay. Their clothes clung to their bodies, drenched in seawater and diesel. The metal floor glistened beneath them as crew members moved with calm precision, checking pulses, wrapping blankets, securing oxygen masks. Neither detainee said a word. Both stared blankly out the open side door, watching the waves swallow what was left of their vessel until nothing remained but a faint ring of white foam. At 5:12 a.m., the Seahawk touched down on the USS Macon's flight deck. The shift from the chaos of capture to the discipline of naval routine was immediate. Medics stepped in, documenting injuries and body temperature, while technicians scraped off fiberglass residues and metal fragments for testing. The men were logged in the system as detained survivors, processed, photographed, and escorted to temporary holding. In the command center, officers reviewed satellite data, cross-referencing thermal footage with known trafficking routes. Messages pulsed through encrypted lines to Washington. The report was concise. Vessel neutralized. 2 survivors, awaiting intelligence transfer. By sunrise, word had reached the Pentagon. The president was briefed within the hour. The first draft of the official statement labeled the strike a successful maritime interdiction under international law. Internally, it was categorized as Operation Silent Current. Meanwhile, the ship remained on station. Below deck, security teams rotated in shifts outside a sealed compartment where the detainees were held. Each was wrapped in gray thermal blankets, their clothes replaced with standard-issue garments. They showed no resistance, no emotion, only the heavy stillness of men aware that everything they knew had ended miles from shore. At noon, a helicopter arrived carrying 2 defense intelligence officers. They boarded with case files and hard drives, ready to document every detail. The Macon's crew cleared space for the interrogation, with no pressure or threats, just a precise sequence of questions, data collection, and verification. Over the next few hours, fragments of truth emerged. The sub, they learned, had launched from a hidden dock deep in Venezuela's Orinoco Delta. Built from molded fiberglass and plywood, it was one of several in a production line designed to move synthetic opioids north. The workshop, barely large enough to fit a truck, was shielded by mangroves and operated by shifting crews of locals under cartel supervision. Each vessel carried up to 3 tons of narcotics. The officers pieced the details together. The route began in the Delta, moved through the Lesser Antilles, then north toward Haiti. An established corridor linking to smaller craft bound for the U.S. coast. Satellite images confirmed heat patterns at suspected sites. In Washington, intelligence teams refined the story further. By afternoon, the president addressed the press, calling it a decisive strike against transnational drug traffickers. Footage of the Seahawk hovering over open water ran across major news networks. To the public, it was a clean, surgical success. On board the Macon, reality felt different. The detainees remained under strict observation. Every few hours, guards logged their condition. They were fed, examined, and photographed again. The doctor noted dehydration, fatigue, and minor contusions. The men barely slept, startled awake by the sound of engines or the clank of tools echoing through the metal corridor. Outside, the Caribbean stretched endless and bright. The Macon traced slow circles in calm water, maintaining position until the arrival of the USS Wasp. The transition was expected to take place before nightfall. The SEAL team, back from debrief, stayed aboard until the handover. Some watched from the deck as preparations began. The prisoners were escorted under armed guard to the helicopter bay. Their wrists were bound, their faces pale from exhaustion. The sea wind whipped against them as they were moved toward the waiting transport. There were no words exchanged. The entire process lasted less than 5 minutes. The helicopter lifted away, leaving behind only the rhythmic sound of the carrier's engines and the faint echo of blades disappearing into the horizon. For the crew, the mission was complete. Files were encrypted, evidence sealed, and coordinates transmitted to intelligence divisions. Somewhere far inland, analysts reviewed the data again. New names, new leads, new maps to trace. On deck, the sea looked calm again. No wreckage, no movement, just the vast stillness that follows violence. By nightfall, the sub's coordinates were just numbers in a logbook. 2 survivors were en route to holding facilities on U.S. territory, awaiting transfer. The Macon turned west, engines steady, lights dimmed to preserve operational silence. The operation lasted less than 12 hours. 4 men had gone to sea. 2 never returned. The ocean carried no record of either. At 1900 hours, the transfer order came through. A helicopter arrived, carrying 2 intelligence officers and a Marine detachment. The detainees were escorted to the deck under armed watch, shackled but calm. The younger man crossed himself before stepping onto the chopper. The captain didn't look back. The Seahawk lifted off, slicing through the orange twilight toward the carrier group anchored farther east. The sub's wreckage was already gone, swallowed by the sea, marked only by an oil sheen and a single floating crate. Hours later, somewhere in the quiet corridors of the Wasp, the interrogation continued. The men spoke in fragments about debts, families, the promise of one last run before freedom. The Americans listened, noting everything. Each sentence was data. Each pause was an opening. By the time dawn broke again, analysts in Washington had pieced together most of the operation. Venezuelan intermediaries, Colombian suppliers, routes running through Trinidadian waters. Every link was evidence for what the administration would soon call Operation Deep Current, a widening campaign to choke the narco-sub networks before they reached American shores. But for the men who had been on the water that morning, it was simpler. For them, it had been a night of noise and salt and light, the sudden end of a long journey they never truly understood. The Macon's crew logged the mission as routine. The SEALs cleaned their gear, filed their reports, and moved on to the next patrol. Somewhere in a locked compartment, the mission footage was archived. Another entry in a growing list of classified encounters across the Caribbean Sea. Officially, it would be described as an interception consistent with maritime law enforcement. Unofficially, among the sailors who saw it up close, it was something else entirely. It was a reminder of how quiet the ocean can be right before the world changes. And as the last entry in the report read, typed without emotion at 11:47 that night, 2 survivors detained. Cargo unrecovered. Mission complete. In the days that followed, the story of the captured survivors dominated headlines across Latin America. Venezuela's government denounced the U.S. strike as an unprovoked assault, accusing Washington of using the war on drugs as a cover for political intimidation. President Nicolas Maduro claimed the attack took place inside Venezuela's exclusive economic zone, and that it was a direct challenge to its sovereignty, and urged others to investigate what he called a massacre disguised as justice. Meanwhile, in Washington, the tone was entirely different. President Trump praised the strike as proof that America will hunt narco-terrorists anywhere, anytime, while defense officials quietly celebrated a flawless operation. The 2 survivors, both in custody, aboard a U.S. Navy ship, were later sent to Ecuador and Colombia to face prosecution. Their capture closed one chapter, but raised a larger question about how far this new Caribbean campaign would go. By the time the story faded from breaking news tickers, the Caribbean had returned to its usual calm, blue water, empty horizons, and the occasional hum of a passing aircraft. Yet beneath that calm lingered unease. For Washington, the operation was another victory in a growing list of successful interdictions. For Caracas and its allies, it was a reminder that the U.S. now claimed the right to strike almost anywhere, so long as the word cartel was attached. The 2 survivors vanished into the machinery of international justice, their names never released, their testimonies unheard. But their capture marked a turning point. It proved that this was no longer just a battle over drugs. It was a test of power, sovereignty, and influence in the hemisphere. And somewhere between silence and diplomacy, the sea kept its secrets, waiting for the next shadow on its horizon. If you found this story powerful, please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us uncover more hidden stories from the world's silent front lines.